the quiet suburban streets of Havant, Hampshire, where rows of modest terraced houses lined the roads and families went about their daily routines, Shay Groves lived a life that outwardly seemed unremarkable, but harbored a darkness few could imagine. At 27 years old, Shay was a mother to a young child, navigating the complexities of single parenthood while holding down part-time work. But behind the closed doors of her home on Botley Drive, her world was steeped in an all-consuming fascination with true crime and the macabre. Her walls were adorned with framed portraits of some of history's most notorious serial killers. Ted Bundy with his charming smile, Jeffrey Dahmer's cold stare, Peter Sutcliffe the Yorkshire Ripper, and even Myra Hindley. Books about gangsters and infamous prisoners like Charles Bronson cluttered her shelves, and she devoured documentaries on murder cases late into the night. She described herself as dark and twisted, embracing the thrill of the taboo. Knives, Viking axes, and other edged weapons were scattered around her bedroom, but the most prized among them was a decorative Celtic dagger, which she kept tucked under her pillow or within easy reach of her bed. Shay's obsession wasn't just a hobby. It bled into every aspect of her personality. Friends knew her as someone who could recite details from infamous cases with eerie precision, analyzing the killer's methods, their childhoods, their psychological profiles. She collected memorabilia, printed posters from online shops, and arranged them like trophies in her living room and bedroom. The decor created an unsettling atmosphere, as if the spirits of the murderers she admired watched over her daily life. For Shay, these figures represented power, control, and a release from the mundane constraints of ordinary existence. She often joked about how she wished she could interview them, pick their brains on what drove them to cross that final line. Little did anyone know that her fascination would one day propel her across that same line, transforming her from passive observer to active participant in a real-life horror story. It was in February 2022 that Shay met Frankie Fitzgerald, a 25-year-old father of two, with a cheeky grin and a reputation for living life on the edge. They crossed paths during a night out with mutual friends in the local area, the kind of boozy evening fueled by laughter, loud music, and the fleeting connections that often form in small-town pubs. Frankie was charming in his rough-around-the-edges way, tattooed, quick with a joke, but carrying the weight of his own turbulent past. He had 2 young children from previous relationships and worked odd jobs to support them. Shay, with her striking looks and intense personality, drew him in immediately. Their connection was electric from the start. A whirlwind of passion, arguments, and intense jealousy that both seemed to thrive on in equal measure. Their relationship was on and off, marked by volatile highs and crushing lows. They shared interests in the darker side of life, including bondage and filming their intimate encounters with a camera set up in Shay's bedroom. Cocaine and alcohol often amplified their emotions in turning minor disagreements into explosive confrontations. Both were obsessively jealous, accusing each other of flirting with exes or strangers. Frankie had a history of messaging other women, a habit that grated on Shay's insecurities. She, in turn, threatened violence during their fights, once even brandishing a knife in anger. Yet they always found their way back to each other, drawn by a toxic magnetism that neither could fully escape. Shay's home became their frequent meeting place, its walls of killers silently bearing witness to their turbulent romance. By mid-July 2022, the cracks in their relationship had widened into chasms. Shay had grown increasingly paranoid about Frankie's fidelity. She monitored his phone when she could, scrolling through messages while he slept or showered. On the evening of July 16th, its tension simmered as they spent time together at her house. They argued about past betrayals, the words sharp and laced with accusations. Frankie, perhaps sensing the storm brewing, tried to diffuse things with affection, but Shay's mind was already racing. Later that night, as the hours ticked toward midnight, they settled into bed. The room was dimly lit by a bedside lamp, the framed faces of Bundy and Dahmer staring down from the walls. Frankie, exhausted from the day's events and whatever substances had passed between them, drifted off to sleep beside her. His breathing grew steady and deep. His body relaxed under the duvet. Shay lay awake, her thoughts churning. Earlier that day, or in the preceding hours, she had discovered messages on Frankie's phone, conversations with another girl that ignited a fire of jealousy within her. And prosecutors would later argue that she mistakenly believed the recipient was a 13-year-old, though the girl turned out to be 17 and had been blocked by Frankie. The details blurred in her rage, but the perceived betrayal felt like a knife to her own heart. How dare he? After everything they had shared, the promises, the intensity, her obsession with true crime had taught her the language of control, the ways killers justified their actions, power, possession, the thrill of dominance. In that moment, lying next to his sleeping form, something fundamental shifted inside Shay. The line between fantasy and reality, between admiring monsters and becoming one, began to dissolve. The exact moment things changed came in the early hours of July 17th, 2022, as the clock approached the dead of night. Frankie was sound asleep, vulnerable and unaware, in his chest rising and falling rhythmically. Shay reached for the Celtic dagger she kept under her pillow, its blade cool and familiar in her grip. The weapon, decorative yet razor sharp, had been a constant companion in her fantasies of darkness. Now it became an instrument of fury. In a surge of jealousy-fueled rage, she struck. First, she slit his throat with a deep, deliberate slash, the blade slicing through flesh and severing vital structures. Frankie may have stirred briefly, a gurgling sound escaping as blood began to pool. But the attack was swift and overwhelming. Then came the frenzy. Shay plunged the dagger into his chest repeatedly, the blade rising and falling in a blur of motion. Reports would later confirm between 17 and 22 stab wounds to the chest area, some penetrating deeply into his lungs and heart. And the assault was savage, driven by an explosion of pent-up emotion that turned her obsession into action. Blood sprayed across the sheets, soaking the duvet and staining the mattress. Frankie's body convulsed in his final moments, but he never fully woke, never had the chance to fight back or cry out. His last conscious thoughts, if any lingered in the haze of sleep, remain unknown. Perhaps a fleeting dream interrupted by unimaginable pain. In those last moments as Frankie lay dying, the room filled with the metallic scent of blood and the heavy silence broken only by Shay's labored breathing. She stood over him, the dagger still in hand, her mind a whirlwind. The man she had loved in her twisted way was gone, reduced to a lifeless form wrapped in the chaos she had created. There was no immediate remorse, no horror at what she had done. Instead, a strange calm mixed with the adrenaline rush she perhaps imagined from all those true crime stories. She had crossed the threshold that her idols had crossed, claiming power in the most final way possible. Shay did not call emergency services right away. Instead, in the immediate aftermath, she reached for her phone. She contacted a friend, Vicky Baytup, via a video call or phone conversation that would later become central to the case. I just lost it, Shay told her, her voice carrying a mix of hysteria and something eerily casual. I picked up my dagger and stabbed him in the neck. Vicky, initially thinking it might be some kind of dark joke or exaggeration, listened as Shay continued. Then came the chilling part. Shay showed her the body on the video call, and she had wrapped Frankie in a duvet and placed him on bin bags, perhaps attempting to contain the scene or stage it in some way. Vicky saw the enormous gash on his throat, the bloodied form, and realized with dawning horror that this was no prank. Shay even giggled during parts of the conversation, speaking as if recounting a normal event before the gravity hit. She showed the body not once, but twice more on the call, insisting her friend look. Vicky, stunned and frightened, ended the call and immediately alerted the police, describing what she had witnessed to the call handler. As the night wore on into the early morning, Shay attempted to cover her tracks in ways that echoed the alibis and manipulations she had studied in her beloved documentaries. She sent edited video clips from their previous intimate encounters to another friend, altering them to suggest non-consensual acts, perhaps hoping to portray herself as a victim of abuse. But investigators would later recover the original footage, revealing the encounters had been consensual. She cleaned parts of the scene, moved the body, and crafted a narrative of self-defense in her mind. Police arrived at the house after Vicky's report, finding Shay in her dressing gown, smoking a cigarette with an almost detached demeanor. Body cam footage captured her arrest, her expression shifting as the reality of the situation set in. Frankie's final texts and calls, pieced together from phone records, painted a picture of a relationship teetering on the edge. In the hours before the murder, there had been messages between them, some affectionate, others laced with the usual jealousy. Frankie had reached out to others casually, or unaware that his actions were being scrutinized so intensely. One of the last interactions involved Shay confronting him about the messages she had seen, the exchange growing heated before they retired to bed. There were no desperate calls for help from Frankie in his final moments. The attack had come too suddenly while he slept. His last communications with friends or family earlier in the day were ordinary, talking about his kids or plans for the week. He had no inkling that the woman beside him would become his executioner. The investigation that followed uncovered the full extent of Shay's obsession. Police photographs of the home revealed the killer portraits staring down at the crime scene. The Celtic dagger recovered as the murder weapon, its blade still bearing evidence. Books on true crime and gangsters lined the shelves, and the camera set up in the bedroom told of their shared, but now tragically twisted intimacies. Shay was arrested and charged with murder. During her trial at Winchester Crown Court in early 2023, Prosecutors painted her as manipulative and calculating, using her knowledge of crime documentaries to fabricate a self-defense story and an alibi. She claimed a loss of control or diminished responsibility, arguing the relationship's toxicity and her own mental state played a role. The jury heard details of the frenzied stabbing, the video call to Vicky where she showed the body while giggling, and the edited clips meant to mislead. The defense tried to humanize Shay, highlighting her difficult childhood and the mutual volatility with Frankie, including their bondage interests and substance use. But the evidence was overwhelming. The one-sided nature of the attack on a sleeping man, the depth and number of wounds, 17 to the chest, plus the throat slash, spoke of intent, not mere reaction. The jury deliberated and found her guilty of murder on February 1st, 2023. On February 22nd, the judge sentenced Shay Groves to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 23 years before she could be considered for parole. In his remarks, the judge noted the profound impact on Frankie's family, who would grieve for decades, their lives blighted by the loss of a young father in his mid-20s. Shay remained largely expressionless in the dock as the sentence was handed down, though she had smiled earlier upon conviction. The case sent shock waves through Havant and beyond, a stark reminder of how fascination with darkness could curdle into something lethal. Now, what drove Shay Groves, a true crime enthusiast and mother, to become the killer she once only studied from afar? Psychologists and true crime analysts speculated on the blurring of lines, how repeated exposure to tales of murder might desensitize or even empower someone already prone to jealousy and volatility. Her home, once a shrine to serial killers, became a crime scene itself. The portraits now evidence of a mind that had internalized their lessons too deeply. In the aftermath, Frankie's family mourned a man taken too soon, his children left without their father. Friends reflected on the warning signs they might have missed in Shay's quirky obsessions. The quiet town of Havant carried on, but the story lingered. A cautionary tale whispered in local pubs and online forums. Shay's obsession had promised her a sense of control and excitement, but it delivered only destruction. In slitting Frankie's throat and stabbing him repeatedly as he slept, she hadn't become one of the powerful figures on her walls. She had become another cautionary entry in the annals of true crime she once consumed so eagerly. The final text from Frankie, innocuous and everyday, contrasted sharply with the brutality that followed. His last moments were peaceful in sleep, stolen away in a frenzy born of misplaced jealousy and unchecked fascination. The video call where Shay revealed her deed to Vicky, giggling at first, then insistent on showing the wrapped body with its gaping wound, marked the point of no return the moment her private horror became public. Things had changed irrevocably in that bedroom, under the gaze of killers past, when a dagger met flesh and a relationship ended in blood. Years later, the case remains a chilling example of how personal demons, amplified by cultural obsessions, can lead to irreversible tragedy. Shay Groves sits behind bars, serving her minimum 23 years, perhaps reflecting on the documentaries that once entertained her and now define her legacy. Frankie Fitzgerald's life, full of promise and flaws, was cut short in the prime of his 20s. His final breaths taken unaware beside the woman who claimed to love him. The story of Shay and Frankie is not one of glamour or intrigue like the tales she adored. It is one of raw human failure, where jealousy exploded into violence and fascination crossed into fatality. In the end, here's the quiet town of Havant taught a harsh lesson. Some obsessions are better left as stories on a screen, not lived out in the dead of night.